In this video, we'll be taking a look at the most often used Maya windows, including the attribute editor, the outliner, the hypershade, the hypergraph, the graph editor, and the layer editor. You can see when you select an object in the channel box, you'll get a number of its attributes. By pressing Ctrl A, you'll be able to toggle the attribute editor, which is the first window we're going to be taking a look at. The attribute editor gives you access to a lot of information that allows you to edit any of the selected objects that you've got going on by going into any of its nodes. You can tear off the window, and if you close it, just simply press Ctrl A to pop it back open, and you can redock it by moving it over to the channel box area. Now let's take a look at the outliner. Under Window, Outliner. As you can see, I've set a hotkey for it. It's a very, very useful window that gives you an outline format view of all the objects in your scene. The objects, the groups are all selectable. You can change the names of any object by simply double-clicking on the entry in the outliner. You can reorder objects by middle mouse button dragging them, and if you highlight the line in between two other entries, it'll simply place that object in between. If, however, you pick an object and you middle mouse button drag it so it outlines over a node entry, it will group or parent that object under that. We'll go ahead and hit Ctrl Z to undo that. Let's go ahead and create a polygon cube, and we'll see that the icons in the outliner are slightly different. These are NURBS surface icons. These are group node icons, and this is a polygon mesh icon. My object, which I've created, will be at the origin. If I hit W for move, with the P cube selected in the outliner, I can move the cube out. Let's go ahead and put it close to Mars. And I'll double click and rename this Comet. And I'll middle mouse button drag it over to Mercury orbit. That will place the comet in the Mercury orbit group. And as you can see, it's part of the animation now. If I go to the Mercury orbit, wherever I move that group, the square comet will go with it. To remove the comet from the group, I simply middle mouse button drag it out and place it anywhere else in the outliner. And now it is no longer part of that group. At the bottom of the outliner is a little sliding bar that gives you a split view to allow you to focus on two different parts of the listing of your objects. And for example, I can grab Neptune Moon from down here and move it to group it to Venus orbit up there. I'll Ctrl Z to undo that, and I'll drag that bar back down for a single view. Now, if in your outliner you have a little plus symbol next to all of the entries, take a look under Display, and you probably have the Shapes option turned on. This allows you to select the shape node of an object as well as its DAG node. The DAG node is essentially the node that gives its position and orientation information, and the shape node gives access to attributes that control how the object tessellates and renders. For simplicity's sake, I like to keep the shapes turned off in the outliner. Now let's go ahead and close the outliner and take a look at the hypergraph. Found under Window, there's two types, the hypergraph hierarchy and the hypergraph connections. We'll be opening the hypergraph hierarchy, and we'll see all the objects in our scene in a more graphical layout than we do in the outliner. Selecting an object in the hypergraph selects it in the scene as well as in the outliner. These two function very much the same, but have a different view of how objects are grouped. Navigating in the hypergraph is the same as in Maya's Windows. You hold down Alt or the Option key on a Mac, middle mouse button to pan, or Alt and right mouse button to zoom in and out. If I press this button, I will turn this view from a hierarchy view to a connections view, which gives me the input and output connections of a selected object. Let's go select Jupiter and go to its connections. You can see it has nodes. In this case, it has animation on this planet that feed into the object itself. This makes the hypergraph very important for editing the connections between nodes and editing the relationships between objects when you're in the input and output connections view. Simply click this icon to go back to the scene hierarchy. For most tasks involving grouping and hierarchy, the outliner is a faster and simpler method of controlling the hierarchies in your scene, while the hypergraph is extremely powerful in editing relationships and connections between nodes. For example, we have animation on the Jupiter object. You can see we have the channels in pink here. These correspond to these graph nodes, which signify the animation. If I were to select one of these nodes and delete it, you'll notice that I've lost the animation on Jupiter. This is how you can edit. I'll go ahead and hit Z or Control Z to undo that move, and I've got my animation back. Let's go ahead and close the hypergraph and the outliner and take a look at my favorite window in Maya, and that is the Hypershade. Found under Window Rendering Editors, the Hypershade gives you access to all the materials or shaders that are in the scene. Navigating is very easy in the Hypershade. If you middle mouse button drag one of the shaders down to the work area, you'll be able to hold the Alt or Option key and the middle mouse button to pan or the right mouse button to zoom in and out. The work area on the bottom allows you to edit the connections of an object. If I go and click this icon, I'll have a look at its input and output connections. You can create very complex and very intricate shading networks that have lots of nodes that can input into a shader or material. On the left-hand side, we've got two panels that allow me to create any sort of render-related node that can be easily looked at by clicking any of the subcategories, or if you want to see all of them, simply hold down Control to select multiple entries. We've got Maya mental ray materials and also quite a few utilities, textures, and things like that that you can create. Adjusting a material or a shader is quite easy. Simply double-clicking on a shader will open the hypergraph that allows you to change any of its attributes. For example, if we want to change Earth's color from a blue, all I have to do is double-click on the shader to open the attribute editor and click on the color swatch, and now I've got a red Earth. Now let's say I want to create a new material. Let's use a blinn, and we'll set its color to a little bit of a pale blue here by using the color picker. Once we have that set, I'd want to reassign that to the Earth. If I select the object in my scene, I can go into the Hypershade and right-click on the shader to get a marking menu. And from here, I'm going to select Assign Material to Selection, and that will pop this blue blinn right onto the Earth. Similarly, if I want to see what objects are assigned to a shader, I can simply right-click on the shader and select Objects with Material, and that will select the object in the scene so I can see exactly what is assigned. I can also clear my work area by clicking this button. This only removes them from the work area. It doesn't actually delete them from the scene. So that if I want to edit another object, I can simply middle mouse button, drag it back into the work area. Let's go ahead and clear that, and let's select this planet, and we'll click this button to graph the materials on selected objects. When I click that, it essentially takes the material, the shader that's assigned to the selected object, and brings it up in the work area for editing. Let's go ahead and close the Hypershade and take a look at the Graph Editor found under Window, Animation Editors. The Graph Editor is a way to edit your animation that's in the scene. If I pop open the outliner, I'm going to go ahead on, let's say, the Earth. We have animation on its rotate as it orbits. Go ahead and hit Control A so we can get back to the channel box. And we've got the Earth orbiting around the Sun, and its animation is signified by this curve. Navigating inside the Graph Editor is also an Alt or Option key with a middle mouse button or with a right mouse button. Simply adjusting the curve allows you to change the animation. This is highly useful for all sorts of animation work. You can see if we select the Earth itself, it has its own rotation animation. That's why it's important to select exactly the node that has the animation you want to edit. Usually the outliner is the best way to do that. The way the editing works in the Graph Editor is expressed in the value of the object's attribute expressed over time or frames. So for example, to see the rotation of the orbit node, we can see that at frame 24, we're at about a rotation of 45 or so. That is the Graph Editor in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and close these windows and move on to the Layer Editor. The Layer Editor gives you access to creating layers in your scene to organize what you're doing. Let's go ahead and select Saturn and its moons. If we go into the outliner, we can see what we have selected. I'm going to, in the Display tab of the Layer Editor, click this button, which allows me to create a new layer and assign automatically the selected objects that are in there. Layer Editor, if I double click on the layer entry, I'll get the Edit Layer dialog window, and I can call this Saturn Layer. And I can also assign it, let's say, a green color. That doesn't change the color of the objects, but if I go into wireframe mode by pressing 4, it does change the color of the wireframe, which is great for organization in your scene. Let's go back to shaded view with pressing 5. I've got a visibility toggle for the layer and all the objects in the layer, and this toggle allows me to change from normal to template view, which disallows me from selecting the object and turns it into wireframe gray, to reference mode, which allows me to see it as shaded but disallows me from selecting it, which makes it, again, easy to work around if I need to. Simply clicking on it will toggle through the different modes for that layer. Let's go ahead and select these objects and create a new layer. What I can do is middle mouse button drag to change the ordering of the layers, again, strictly for organizational purposes. Double click and we'll call this Neptune layer. And we're done. In this video, we took a look at the most often used windows in Maya: the attribute editor, the outliner, the hypershade, the hypergraph, the graph editor, and the layer editor.